We're going to start with NBC News White House correspondent Aaron Gilchrist, CNBC senior economics reporter Steve Liesman, and international trade expert Greta Peisch. Greta was general counsel for the U.S. Trade Representative and is now a partner at Wiley Ryan. Aaron, I want to start with you. Is the decision to push ahead with these tariffs really about fentanyl? Because what I'm hearing from both Canadian and Mexican officials is they're not really sure what exactly the U.S. wants them to do.
I think you're right about that. We heard the same thing from the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau a little while ago. His press conference ended about 15 minutes ago, and he had some very blunt words for the Trump administration about what's happening right now. We talk about fentanyl, and we know that from the beginning, when these executive orders around tariffs on Mexico and Canada and China were signed, that fentanyl seemed to be the key point that the administration wanted to get across. They're concerned about those illegal drugs coming into the United States from the southern and northern borders in particular. At the same time, we've seen President Trump and other members of the administration point to more economic concerns as drivers for these tariffs on Mexico and Canada in particular. The president posted on his social media site today, Canada doesn't allow American banks to do business in Canada, but their banks flood the American market. Oh, that seems fair to me, doesn't it? A rhetorical question there. Obviously, we do know that American banks do business in Canada, quite a bit of business in Canada, as a matter of fact. But this is what is murkying the waters, if you will, in terms of what exactly is the issue that President Trump wants Canada and Mexico to address. When the Canadian Prime Minister, Christina, was asked what he believes is the reason for these tariffs, he said that he believes that President Trump wants to collapse the Canadian economy and that he wants to do that in order to make it possible for the U.S. to annex Canada. This is a prime minister who is on his way out of office and I think spoke more bluntly today, Christina, than we've heard from many Canadian prime ministers in quite some time. The Mexican president also spoke today, and she said that she doesn't believe there's any justification for these tariffs on Mexico or on Canada for that matter. And she'll talk more this weekend about what the Mexicans plan to do in response.
Yeah, Trudeau is expected to get trounced in the upcoming election, but after this, his party is actually seeing a surge. All right, Steve Liesman, I want to go to you now. How much more can American consumers expect to pay in the short term? You know, I went grocery shopping this last week. I swear I was already noticing a difference, but I don't know if that's just in my brain. Like, when are we going to start to see prices really go up?
Well, it could be happening already because some companies were stockpiling stuff, and that could have driven up prices in the stockpiling. Real quick, I want to back up what Aaron was talking about because we had Secretary Lutnick on our air this morning, and he went back and forth between, oh, it's about fentanyl. Oh, why are any American cars made in Canada? So it was very unclear listening to the full interview of Secretary Lutnick what the reason for these tariffs are. And it's not clear the administration has made that clear to our trading partners. As for prices, it can go anywhere from the full price being passed along or even more than the full tariff being passed along, because some of these tariffs are going to nest in that products go back and forth over the border several times in the production process. And as far as we can tell right now, there's going to be tariffs added on tariffs. So the effective tariff could be more than the 25%. It could be less in that some importers could eat some of it. But essentially, Secretary Bessent is wrong. In most economists, almost every study I've seen shows the consumer, the importer, pays the price for the tariff, not the exporter.
All right, Greta, you've negotiated the end of trade disputes. Where do you go from here? How do you see this ending? Is there a way out?
Well, I think that goes to the very point that's already been made, that the question is, what is President Trump looking for? What are the purpose of these tariffs? And the legal rationale that has been stated is to stem the flow of illegal immigration and fentanyl into this country. But there's a lot of questions about, well, what can Canada and Mexico do to resolve this issue and have the tariffs reduced or go away?
I also want to ask you, Warren Buffett compared the tariffs to an act of war. I mean, I spoke to the Canadians recently and people in the Mexican government, and they're both very upset about this. Is that accurate? Do you think this is an act of war?
Well, I don't think we're there. This is not an act of war. I think that there has been discussion. You heard Secretary Bessent talk about continued negotiations. So I think that it's still a big question. Where do we go from here? It is certainly unprecedented, both to use this authority and of this magnitude to impose tariffs on trading partners. It felt like a lot in the first Trump administration when broad tariffs were put on China. This is on the order of 5 or 6 times the amount of trade that was at issue there. And so how do you de-escalate? What's the off-ramp? What are the asks? These are all questions that still we don't have a lot of answers to.
And Steve, if they can't de-escalate or find that off-ramp, if one exists, could supply chain disruptions come anywhere near what we saw during the pandemic?
Well, certainly for a time, supply chains are going to be disrupted. Remember that we created this whole North American supply chain, and that's what it's called, because both Canada, the United States and Mexico have established these supply chains based upon treaties, first based on NAFTA, and then based upon the United States agreement that was negotiated under President Trump. And what's odd about this to many people is here he is going back on an agreement that he established in 2019 and called it one of the best trade agreements that was out there. So right now, what's happening is you have companies that are figuring out where's the best place to make a product. Can I bring it back into the United States? Will I be able to sell it here profitably? I've heard some estimates that the cost of a car could go up by $10,000 because of this. That will make some products not profitable in the United States, which is why, by the way, these tariffs beget additional tariffs in April, because now he has to protect other parts of the North American supply chain.
Yeah, Aaron, talk to us about the politics of this, because as Steve just mentioned, the USMCA, which is what came after NAFTA, was negotiated by the first Trump administration. So not only is he kind of going back on his policy there, but he campaigned on lowering prices, and he seems to have backed himself into a corner here. How much of tonight's address to Congress do you think the president is going to focus on the economy?
Well, I think you'll definitely hear the president talk about the economy, and probably more from the perspective of the successes as he sees them at this point. We do know, as you've referenced, that there are going to be reciprocal tariffs that are put in place in the early part of April. The president said yesterday that he fully intends to make sure that happens as well. What those tariffs look like in terms of how big they are and which countries have which types of tariffs are something that is yet to be seen. We know that the administration has been working on that level of detail, again, to be rolled out in April, but we should expect to hear the president talk about that in his speech tonight. He would likely reference the tariffs with Mexico and Canada and China as well. We've heard him say in the past that if those countries took reciprocal action against the United States, then they could expect to see more action taken by his administration as well. We heard from the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent earlier today that the president is likely to talk about, again, some of his successes, the billions of dollars in investment that he's been able to draw into the United States over the last month or so that he's been in office. We know mostly from companies that are based in Asia. The president also likely to talk about, the Treasury Secretary said, some of the work that's been done to improve mortgage rates in this country. Also, the work that the administration is looking to do and has already done to some extent on cutting regulation and cutting red tape. All those are things, Christina, that the president sees as positive and will likely, again, try to lift up in his comments today. Of course, there will be many other topics, immigration, things of that nature, that the president will talk about tonight as well.
I'm sure he'll have a lot to say. Steve, I do want to ask, the White House is arguing essentially this is short-term pain for long-term economic gain. Is there any chance that these tariffs benefit the U.S. economy?
Well, over time, there could be some companies that move production into the United States. But the question becomes, at what price? Right now, Secretary Luckman this morning on our air said, why are any cars made in Canada that are sold in the United States? And the answer to that is he should know it's capitalism. It was the cheaper place to make certain products or certain parts of the product and sell it in the United States at a better profit, at a better price. Well, what's going to happen is everybody's going to pay a higher price for certain gain that's out there. Your question was studied, in fact, from the 2018 tariffs, where, yes, there was some benefit to the steel industry from the tariffs that were put in place. However, the steel users, they lost jobs. So what's happening is there is some short-term pain that will happen, and then over time, what's going to happen is the bigger losers will appear, and those are all the users of the stuff that's being brought in and for which prices are rising.